Sister Margaret had devoted 43 years of her life to the church, her days structured around prayer, service, and quiet contemplation. At 65, she felt called to expand her ministry beyond the convent walls. The St. Catherine's Elderly Care Centre had recently put out a call for volunteers, and something deep within her spirit stirred when she read the notice. Perhaps it was divine providence, or perhaps simply the natural progression of a heart that had always sought to serve others in their most vulnerable moments. The facility sat on a quiet street, lined with maple trees, their leaves beginning to show the first hints of autumn gold. As Sister Margaret approached the building for the first time, she noticed how the afternoon sunlight filtered through the windows, casting long, warm shadows across the entrance. She had spent decades caring for children at the church's orphanage, but working with the elderly would be entirely different territory. Yet something felt inexplicably right about this new chapter, as if she were being guided towards something greater than herself. When she met with the facility director, Mrs. Henderson, the woman's relief was palpable. "We desperately need someone with your compassion and experience," she explained, leading Sister Margaret through the corridors lined with wheelchairs and the gentle murmur of afternoon activities. The halls smelled of disinfectant, mixed with the faint aroma of the evening meal being prepared. As they walked, Sister Margaret observed the residents, some engaged in conversation, others staring blankly at nothing in particular, all of them representing lives that had been full and vibrant, but now existed in various stages of memory and decline. The elderly residents of St. Catherine's seemed to exist in a world suspended between memory and reality. Some stared blankly at television screens, others slept in their chairs, and a few wandered the halls with the restless energy of souls searching for something they could no longer name. Sister Margaret moved among them with the same gentle presence she had brought to every ministry, offering a kind word here, a gentle touch there, treating each person as a beloved child of God rather than a forgotten relic of society. During her first week, she learned their stories, fragments of lives that had once been full and vibrant. There was Mr. Peterson, a former teacher who still tried to give lectures to invisible students, his weathered hands moving across an imaginary chalkboard as he explained mathematical concepts to empty air. Mrs. Kim, who had raised 7 children and now couldn't remember any of their names, would show pictures to anyone who would listen, calling each grandchild by a different name each time she looked at their photograph. The residents responded to Sister Margaret's presence with varying degrees of awareness. Some seemed to recognize her religious habit and would cross themselves when she approached. Others simply enjoyed the gentle touch of her hand on their shoulder or the sound of her voice, reading scripture aloud during the afternoon activities. There was something about her serene demeanor that brought calm to the often chaotic environment of confused minds and frustrated caregivers. Even the staff began to comment on how much more peaceful the facility felt when Sister Margaret was present, as if her very presence carried some divine grace that soothed troubled spirits. During her orientation, Nurse Patricia led Sister Margaret to room 247, where she whispered about the woman who never spoke, never smiled, and seemed to carry the weight of unspeakable regret in her hollow eyes. "She's been here 3 years, the nurse explained in hushed tones. "Dementia has taken most of her memories, but sometimes she'll call out for someone named Margaret. The doctors think it might be a daughter she lost touch with years ago. It's heartbreaking, really. She has no family, no visitors, just sits by that window day after day, staring at something only she can see." Rosa Elena Vasquez sat motionless in her wheelchair, positioned perfectly to catch the morning light streaming through the large window of room 247. At 87, her once dark hair had turned silver white, and her hands that had worked in factories, cleaned houses, and counted pennies to survive, now lay folded uselessly in her lap. The dementia had stolen so much from her, But it had also granted her an unexpected mercy, the ability to forget the shame that had haunted her for over 6 decades. Sister Margaret found herself drawn to this silent figure during her daily rounds. There was something about Rosa's profile against the window light that tugged at something deep and nameless within the nun's chest. The way the elderly woman's fingers traced patterns on the arm of her wheelchair, the slight tilt of her head when birds flew past the window, the gentle rhythm of her breathing. All of it seemed familiar in a way that Sister Margaret couldn't explain. She began spending extra time in room 247, reading scripture aloud, sharing stories from her day, simply sitting in comfortable silence when words seemed inadequate. "Good morning, dear one," Sister Margaret would whisper each day as she entered room 247. "It's a beautiful day that the Lord has made." And sometimes, just sometimes, Rosa's lips would move in what might have been an attempt to respond, though no sound emerged. These small moments became precious to Sister Margaret, who had learned over the years that ministry often meant showing up faithfully, even when the impact remained invisible. As weeks passed, Sister Margaret began to notice subtle changes in Rosa's behavior when she was present. The elderly woman's breathing would slow and deepen. Her shoulders would relax, and occasionally she would turn her head slightly toward the sound of the nun's voice. There were moments when Sister Margaret could swear that Rosa was listening intently to her prayers, even responding with barely perceptible nods during certain passages of Scripture. One afternoon, while Sister Margaret was reading from the Book of Psalms, Rosa suddenly reached out and touched the nun's hand. It was the first deliberate movement the staff had seen from her in months. The touch was gentle but purposeful, as if Rosa was trying to communicate something that words could not express. Sister Margaret felt a jolt of electricity at the contact, a recognition that went deeper than conscious thought. She covered Rosa's hand with her free one and continued reading, but her voice trembled slightly as she felt an inexplicable connection forming between them. The nursing staff began to comment on Rosa's improved demeanor whenever Sister Margaret was around. "It's like she knows you," Nurse Patricia observed one day. "I've never seen her respond to anyone the way she responds to you. Maybe you remind her of someone from her past." Sister Margaret nodded thoughtfully, but deep in her heart she was beginning to suspect that the connection might be more profound than anyone realized. As autumn deepened into winter, Sister Margaret noticed that Rosa seemed more agitated during certain times of day, particularly in the late afternoon when shadows grew long across the floor. The elderly woman would rock slightly in her wheelchair, her lips moving in silent conversation with ghosts from her past. Sometimes she would reach toward the window as if trying to grasp something just beyond her fingertips, her eyes filled with a longing that broke Sister Margaret's heart. One evening, as Sister Margaret sat reading beside Rosa's bed, the elderly woman suddenly spoke with startling clarity. "I left her at the church, St. Mary's. She was so small, so beautiful. I couldn't give her what she needed." "Oof," the words hung in the air like a confession that had been waiting decades to escape. Rosa's eyes were focused on something far beyond the room, far beyond the present moment, as if she was seeing the past with perfect clarity. Sister Margaret's heart clenched with compassion, but also with something else, a stirring of recognition that she tried to push away. She had heard similar stories throughout her years of service, mothers forced to make impossible choices during times of desperation and poverty. "What was her name?" she asked gently, taking Rosa's weathered hand in her own. The elderly woman's fingers were cold and fragile, like delicate bird bones wrapped in tissue paper. But the moment of clarity had passed as quickly as it had come, and Rosa retreated back into the fog of memory, leaving only silence and the steady rhythm of her labored breathing. The next morning, Rosa seemed to have no memory of their conversation, but Sister Margaret couldn't shake the image of a young mother making the most heartbreaking decision of her life. The words echoed in her mind throughout the day, stirring something deep and troubling within her soul. That night, Sister Margaret found herself unable to sleep, Rosa's words echoing in her mind like a prayer that demanded to be heard. She had been left at St. Mary's Church as an infant in 1958, a fact she had known her entire life, but had long accepted as simply God's plan for her path. The nuns who raised her had always been honest about her origins. She had been found on the church steps with only a small note asking that she be loved and cared for. Could it be possible? The thought seemed too extraordinary, too convenient to be real. Yet something in Rosa's voice, in the way she had described leaving her baby at the church, resonated with a frequency that Sister Margaret felt in her bones. She spent the following days observing Rosa more carefully, looking for any physical similarities, any signs that might confirm or deny the impossible possibility that had taken root in her mind. The more she studied Rosa's features, the more unsettled she became. They shared the same deep-set brown eyes, the same delicate bone structure, the same way of tilting their heads when deep in thought. Sister Margaret had always wondered about her heritage, about the woman who had given her life and then disappeared into anonymity. The nuns had told her that speculation was pointless, that God's plan was perfect, regardless of human circumstances. But now, sitting beside Rosa day after day, Sister Margaret began to feel the stirring of something that went beyond mere curiosity. It was recognition at a cellular level, the kind of knowing that exists between people who share blood and bone, and the mysterious connections that bind families together across time and space. She found herself studying Rosa's hands, noting how they moved in the same unconscious patterns as her own when she was nervous or deep in prayer. Sister Margaret decided to visit the church archives, something she had never done before, despite living at St. Mary's for most of her life. Father O'Brien, now in his 80s, and one of the few people who had been at the church when she arrived as an infant, helped her locate the records from 1958. His arthritic fingers moved slowly through the yellowed files, searching for the documentation of her arrival. There, in fading ink on official church letterhead, was the sparse record of her beginning. Female infant, approximately 6 months old, found October 15, 1958, with note requesting care. No identification of parents. Child appears healthy and well cared for. Note indicated mother's name as Rosa Eleanor. Sister Margaret's breath caught in her throat as she read the words she had never seen before. The nuns had never mentioned that her mother's name was included in the original documentation. "I remember that morning," Father O'Brien said softly, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "Sister Catherine found you just as the sun was coming up. You were wrapped in a beautiful hand-knitted blanket, and there was a small silver cross tucked in with you. The note was written in careful script, obviously by someone who had very little education, but wanted to make sure every word was perfect. It said that your mother loved you more than life itself, but couldn't provide for you properly." Sister Margaret felt the world shifting around her as she processed this new information. Rosa Elena. The name matched perfectly with the woman in room 247. The timeline aligned with what Rosa had revealed during her moment of clarity. But beyond the facts, Sister Margaret felt a deep knowing in her heart that went beyond circumstantial evidence. This was more than coincidence. This was divine providence, revealing itself in the most unexpected and beautiful way. Armed with this new knowledge, Sister Margaret returned to St. Catherine's with her heart pounding and her mind racing. She approached Rosa's room with trembling hands, uncertain of what she hoped to find or how she would handle whatever truth might emerge. Rosa was in her usual position by the window, but today there seemed to be an alertness in her posture that hadn't been there before, as if she too sensed that something significant was about to unfold. "Rosa," Sister Margaret said softly, using the woman's name for the first time. The elderly woman turned toward her with startling quickness, her eyes focusing on Sister Margaret's face with an intensity that took the nun's breath away. For a moment, the fog of dementia seemed to lift completely, and Rosa stared at her with the clear, penetrating gaze of someone who was seeing not just the present moment, but decades of memory and longing. "You know," Rosa whispered, her voice steady and clear. "You know who I am, don't you?" Sister Margaret sank into the chair beside Rosa's wheelchair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. The recognition in Rosa's eyes was unmistakable, and it confirmed what Sister Margaret's heart had been trying to tell her for weeks. I think you might be my mother," Sister Margaret said, the words feeling both foreign and perfectly natural on her tongue. Rosa's face crumpled with emotion, and tears began streaming down her weathered cheeks. She reached out with shaking hands to touch Sister Margaret's face, her fingers tracing the nun's features as if trying to memorize every detail. "My little girl," Rosa breathed. "My beautiful little Margaret. I've been waiting for you to come back to me. I've been praying every day for 65 years that I would see you again, that I would know you were safe and loved and happy. And here you are, wearing God's habit, carrying His love in your heart." Through tears and trembling voices, mother and daughter began to piece together the fragments of their separated lives. Rosa's lucidity seemed to strengthen with each passing moment, as if finding her daughter had awakened something vital within her spirit that had been dormant for years. She shared what she remembered of Sister Margaret's early months, how she had sung lullabies in Spanish, how the baby had always been fascinated by sunlight streaming through windows, how difficult it had been to walk away from St. Mary's that October morning. "I was 17 years old," Rosa explained, her voice gaining strength as the memories flowed. "Your father, he disappeared when he found out about you. I was working in a factory during the day and cleaning offices at night, but I could barely afford a single room in a boarding house. I had no family, no support, no way to give you the life you deserved. Every night I would hold you and cry, knowing that my love wasn't enough to put food in your mouth or keep you warm or safe." Sister Margaret listened with a breaking heart, imagining her young mother facing such an impossible choice. "Tell me about the day you left me," she asked gently, needing to understand every detail of the decision that had shaped both their lives. Rosa closed her eyes, and for a moment Sister Margaret feared that the clarity would fade again. But when Rosa opened them, they were filled with the crystal-clear pain of perfect memory. "I watched from across the street," Rosa confessed, her voice breaking. "I watched until Sister Catherine found you and took you inside. I wanted to run back to take you home with me, but I knew you would have a better life without me. I had nothing to offer you except love, and love doesn't pay for medical care or education or all the things a child needs to grow up strong and safe." Sister Margaret found herself grieving not for her own lost childhood, but for the young woman Rosa had been, frightened, alone, making an impossible choice with a heart full of love and empty pockets. "You gave me the greatest gift possible," she told her mother, taking Rosa's hands in her own. "You gave me life, and you gave me to people who loved me and helped me find my purpose. Everything I am, everything I've been able to do for others, started with your sacrifice." Rosa's face transformed as she heard these words of forgiveness and understanding. The guilt and shame that had haunted her for over 6 decades seemed to lift from her shoulders, replaced by something that looked remarkably like peace. "Did they love you?" she asked anxiously. "Were you happy? Did you have enough to eat and warm clothes and people who cared about you?" "I was cherished," Sister Margaret assured her. "The nuns treated me like their own daughter. I received an excellent education. I found my calling to serve God and others, and I've had a rich, fulfilling life dedicated to helping people who need love and care. You didn't abandon me, Rosa. You gave me to exactly the right people at exactly the right time. For the first time since Sister Margaret had known her, Rosa smiled, a radiant expression that transformed her entire face and revealed the beauty she must have possessed as a young woman. It was like watching the sun break through storm clouds, illuminating everything with golden light. I used to pray every night that you were happy, Rosa said. I used to imagine you growing up strong and loved, maybe becoming a teacher or a nurse. I never imagined you would become a nun, but now I see. It's perfect. You've spent your life taking care of people who needed love, just like you did when you were small. The days that followed were filled with a bittersweet mixture of joy and urgency. Rosa's lucid moments became more frequent, as if finding her daughter had awakened something vital within her spirit. They talked for hours about Rosa's life, the factory jobs, the struggle to survive, the relationships that never quite worked out because she couldn't stop thinking about the baby she had given away. Sister Margaret shared stories of her childhood at the convent, her calling to religious life, the children she had helped at the orphanage. I kept every penny I could spare, Rosa told her during one of their conversations. I put it in a coffee can under my mattress, thinking that maybe someday I would be able to find you and give it to you. When I got sick and had to come here, I asked the social worker to put it in a bank account. It's not much, but it's yours. It's always been yours. Sister Margaret was moved by this revelation, but she gently explained that she had taken vows of poverty and couldn't accept personal wealth. Use it for the other residents here, she suggested. Use it to make their lives a little brighter, a little more comfortable. That would honor both of us and the love that brought us together. They established a daily routine of prayer and conversation. Sister Margaret would arrive each morning after her duties at the convent, and they would spend the day sharing memories, looking through photo albums that Sister Margaret brought from St. Mary's, and simply enjoying each other's presence. Other residents and staff began to notice their special bond, commenting on how peaceful Rosa seemed whenever Sister Margaret was near, how the older woman's face would light up the moment she heard the nun's footsteps in the hallway. As winter deepened, Sister Margaret rearranged her entire schedule to spend as much time as possible at Rosa's bedside. She received special permission from the Mother Superior to make St. Catherine's her primary ministry, understanding that this time with her mother was a gift that wouldn't last forever. The other nuns supported her decision, recognizing the miraculous nature of their reunion and the healing it was bringing to both women. Rosa shared stories that filled in the missing pieces of Sister Margaret's identity. She learned that her father had been a musician, which explained her love of church hymns and her ability to sing. She discovered that her grandmother had been known for her kindness to strangers, a trait that had clearly been passed down. Rosa told her about the prayers she had said every night, the candles she had lit on Sister Margaret's birthday each year, the way she had followed news about St. Mary's Church, hoping to catch some glimpse of her daughter's life. I used to walk past the church sometimes, Rosa admitted, especially when you would have been starting school or graduating or during Christmas. I would stand across the street and imagine you inside, safe and warm and surrounded by people who loved you. It was the only comfort I had for all those years, knowing that you were growing up in God's house. Sister Margaret realized that she felt no anger toward her mother, only profound gratitude and a deep sadness for all the years they had lost. Do you know what's miraculous about this? She asked Rosa one afternoon. I've spent my entire life believing that God led me to my purpose. Now I understand that He led me back to you too. After all these years, all these prayers, He brought us together in the place where you needed me most. During one of Rosa's clearer moments, she asked Sister Margaret to help her write a letter, a final message that would explain everything to anyone who might wonder about their story. With shaking hands, Rosa dictated while Sister Margaret wrote, creating a document that would serve as both confession and blessing for future generations. "To anyone who reads this," the letter began, "I want them to know that love sometimes means letting go. I gave my daughter life twice, once when I brought her into this world, and again when I had the courage to place her where she could grow into who God meant her to be. I never stopped loving her, never stopped praying for her, never stopped hoping that someday she would understand why I made the choice I did." The letter went on to describe their reunion, the forgiveness they had shared, and the peace that had finally come to both their hearts. Rosa wanted the world to know that their story was one of triumph, not tragedy, a testament to the power of love to transcend time and circumstance and find its way back home. As February arrived with its gentle snowfall, Rosa's health began to decline more noticeably. The clarity that had blessed their reunion started to fade again, replaced by longer periods of confusion and sleep. But even in her diminished state, she seemed to recognize Sister Margaret's presence, reaching for her hand whenever the nun entered the room, smiling that radiant smile that had become so precious. Sister Margaret read to her mother from the Psalms, shared stories from the convent, and sometimes simply held her hand in comfortable silence. Other residents and staff began to gather outside room 247 during these times, drawn by the palpable sense of peace and love that emanated from within. Even in her final days, Rosa was teaching everyone around her about the power of forgiveness and the beauty of unconditional love. On a quiet February morning, as snow fell gently outside the window of room 247, Rosa passed away peacefully in her sleep with Sister Margaret holding her hand. The woman who had spent 65 years carrying the weight of an impossible choice finally found rest, knowing that her sacrifice had resulted in a life of purpose, service, and love. Her last coherent words had been, "Thank you for forgiving me," to which Sister Margaret had replied, "Thank you for loving me enough to let me go." At Rosa's funeral, Sister Margaret stood before a gathering that had grown to include not just staff and residents from St. Catherine's, but also nuns from St. Mary's, parishioners who had heard their story, and strangers who had been touched by their miraculous reunion. "My mother taught me that love sometimes means letting go," she said, her voice strong despite her tears. "She gave me life twice, once when she brought me into this world, and again when she had the courage to place me where I could grow into who God meant me to be." As they laid Rosa to rest, Sister Margaret felt a profound sense of completion. She had found answers to questions she had carried her entire life, but more importantly, she had been able to offer her mother the forgiveness and love that had been waiting 65 years to be expressed. The circle that began with a desperate young woman leaving her baby at a church had closed with grace, understanding, and the unbreakable bond between mother and daughter. Sister Margaret returned to her ministry at St. Catherine's with renewed purpose, carrying with her the knowledge that sometimes God's greatest miracles happen not in dramatic moments, but in quiet rooms where love finally finds its way home. She established a memorial fund in Rosa's name to help other elderly residents who had no family, ensuring that her mother's story would continue to bring comfort and hope to others who felt forgotten or alone. Thank you for listening to this incredible true story of love, loss, and divine providence. It reminds us that some reunions are written in the stars, and that forgiveness has the power to heal wounds that have been carried for decades. This story shows us that every act of love, even the painful decision to let someone go, can bloom into something beautiful when guided by faith and hope. We'd love to hear from you. Please write in the comments below to tell us what part of the world you're listening from. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring true stories that will touch your heart and restore your faith in the beautiful mysteries of life.